What happens when one of comedy's biggest legends walks into what should have been a friendly morning show interview, only to find himself under attack from a host who clearly had her own agenda? The tension was palpable from the moment Eddie Murphy stepped onto the View set. But nobody, and I mean nobody, could have predicted the explosive confrontation that was about to unfold between him and Joy Behar. This wasn't just your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control when respect goes out the window. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're going to want to discuss this one with fellow viewers. Eddie Murphy had been making the rounds promoting his latest project, and The View was supposed to be just another stop on a routine press tour. He walked onto the set with his characteristic smile, greeting the panel of hosts with the kind of warmth and professionalism you'd expect from someone who's been in the entertainment industry for over 4 decades. Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and the other co-hosts welcomed him with genuine enthusiasm, clearly excited to have such an iconic figure on their show. "Eddie, it's so great to have you here," Whoopi said as he settled into the guest chair. "We've been looking forward to this conversation all week." "Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure," Eddie replied, his voice carrying that familiar, easy confidence that has made him beloved by millions of fans worldwide. The interview started off smoothly enough. Eddie talked about his new project with passion and humor, regaling the hosts and audience with behind-the-scenes stories that had everyone laughing. His natural charisma was on full display as he discussed working with the cast and crew, sharing anecdotes that showcased both his comedic timing and his genuine appreciation for the collaborative nature of film. "You know, after all these years in the business, I still get excited about new projects," Eddie said, his eyes lighting up as he spoke. "There's something magical about bringing characters to life and hopefully making people laugh or think or feel something they didn't expect." Sarah Haynes nodded enthusiastically. "That passion really comes through in your work. You've managed to stay relevant across so many different generations of fans." "I think that's because comedy, real comedy, is universal," Eddie responded. "People need to laugh, especially in times like these. If I can provide a little escape or a moment of joy, then I'm doing my job right." But then Joy Behar, who had been unusually quiet during the opening portion of the interview, suddenly leaned forward with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for her moment to pounce. "Speaking of comedy," Joy interrupted, her tone shifting noticeably from the warm atmosphere that had been established. "Don't you think some of your earlier material might be considered problematic by today's standards?" The change in energy was immediate and unmistakable. Eddie's smile faltered slightly as he processed the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly sensing that Joy was steering the interview into potentially dangerous waters. "I'm sorry. What do you mean exactly?" Eddie asked, maintaining his composure, but clearly caught off guard by the aggressive shift in tone. Joy pressed on, seeming to relish the uncomfortable moment she had created. "Well, there are jokes in your old stand-up routines that some people might find offensive. Don't you think you owe your fans an apology for that kind of content?" "Joy," Whoopi interjected gently, trying to redirect the conversation back to safer ground. "Maybe we should focus on Eddie's current work." But Joy wasn't backing down. If anything, Whoopi's attempted intervention seemed to embolden her further. "No, I think this is important to address. In this climate of accountability, shouldn't public figures take responsibility for their past mistakes?" Eddie straightened in his chair, his expression hardening as he realized this wasn't going to be the friendly promotional interview he had signed up for. "Mistakes? Hold on a minute, Joy. Let's be very clear about something here. I've been doing comedy for over 40 years, and I've always pushed boundaries. That's what comedians do. But at whose expense?" Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Some of those boundaries you pushed hurt people. Comedy has always been about examining society, including its flaws and contradictions," Eddie replied, his voice remaining steady, but with an underlying edge that suggested his patience was beginning to wear thin. "If we start censoring art retroactively based on evolving social standards, where does that end?" Joy leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, clearly feeling like she had Eddie on the defensive. "So, you're saying you have no regrets about any of your past material?" "I'm saying that I'm proud of my body of work," Eddie responded firmly. "I've grown as a person and as a performer over the decades, just like everyone else, but I'm not going to sit here and apologize for making people laugh or for being part of comedy history." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and the other hosts were clearly struggling with how to handle the increasingly hostile dynamic that Joy had created. "That's a very convenient way to avoid accountability," Joy said with barely concealed contempt. Eddie's jaw tightened visibly. "Convenient? You think it's convenient to have someone ambush me on what was supposed to be a friendly interview to promote my work? You think it's convenient to have my entire career reduced to whatever talking points you decided to prepare before I walked in here?" "I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked," Joy replied defensively, though her tone suggested she was enjoying the confrontation far more than someone genuinely interested in accountability would. "No, you're not asking questions," Eddie said, his voice rising for the first time. "You're making accusations and demanding apologies for comedy that was created in a different era. Do you apply this same standard to every comedian who's ever pushed boundaries, or just the one sitting in front of you right now?" The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable, with Sarah Haynes attempting to jump in with a peacemaking comment, but Eddie wasn't finished. "Let me ask you something, Joy," he continued, turning to face her directly. "Have you ever said anything in your career that someone might find offensive? Have you ever made a joke that might not age well? Because if we're going to play this game of retroactive judgment, I think it should apply to everyone, don't you?" Joy's face flushed red at Eddie's direct challenge, clearly not expecting him to turn the tables on her so effectively. The smugness that had been radiating from her just moments before was rapidly being replaced by defensive anger. "That's completely different," Joy stammered, obviously flustered by having her own standards applied to herself. "I've never made the kind of material that you have." "Really?" Eddie replied, raising an eyebrow with a kind of skeptical expression that made it clear he wasn't buying her deflection for a second. "So, you've never made a joke about anyone's appearance, their background, their beliefs? You've never said anything that might hurt someone's feelings or make them uncomfortable?" Whoopi tried once again to intervene, sensing that the situation was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control. "Maybe we should take a step back here and remember that we're all on the same team." But Eddie was just getting started, and Joy's attempt to hold him to standards she clearly didn't apply to herself had obviously struck a nerve. "No, Whoopi. I think this is exactly the conversation we need to have, because what's happening right now is a perfect example of the double standards that are destroying honest dialogue in this country." "Double standards?" Joy scoffed, her voice dripping with indignation. "I think you're being a little dramatic here, Eddie." "Dramatic?" Eddie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Joy, you literally ambushed me on live television, demanding that I apologize for my entire career, and you think I'm being dramatic for pointing out the hypocrisy." The audience was now completely silent, riveted by the unprecedented confrontation unfolding before them. This wasn't the usual controlled chaos of daytime television. This was raw, unfiltered conflict between two strong personalities with completely different worldviews. "I wasn't ambushing you," Joy protested, though her defensive tone suggested she knew exactly what she had been doing. "I was asking legitimate questions about accountability and entertainment." "Legitimate questions." Eddie's voice was rising again, his famous composure finally beginning to crack under the pressure of Joy's relentless attacks. "You came into this interview with a predetermined agenda to make me look bad, and now you're trying to gaslight me into thinking this is some kind of journalistic pursuit of truth." Sarah Haynes made another attempt to restore some semblance of civility to the proceedings. "I think what we're all trying to get at here is how artists can grow and evolve while still honoring their past work." "Thank you, Sarah," Eddie said, briefly softening his tone toward the one host who seemed genuinely interested in having a productive conversation. "That's exactly what real growth looks like. It's not about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. It's about learning from experience and continuing to create from a place of authenticity." But Joy wasn't ready to let go of her attack strategy. "Authenticity doesn't excuse harm, Eddie. Words have consequences, and public figures need to acknowledge when their words have caused pain." "And there it is," Eddie said, his voice now filled with a mixture of frustration and disappointment. "The assumption that comedy by its very nature is supposed to cause harm. Do you understand what comedy actually is, Joy? Do you understand its purpose in society? I understand that comedy can be used to marginalize people and reinforce harmful stereotypes." Joy shot back, clearly feeling like she was on solid ground with her social justice talking points. "Comedy can also be used to challenge power structures, to speak truth to authority, and to help people process difficult realities through laughter," Eddie countered. "But I guess that doesn't fit your narrative, does it? The other hosts were now looking increasingly desperate to find a way out of the hostile spiral that the interview had become. Whoopi, who had remained relatively quiet during the escalating conflict, finally decided to take a more direct approach. "Listen, both of you," she said firmly, using the authoritative tone that had made her successful as a moderator for years. "We're all adults here, and we can disagree without tearing each other apart." "Whoop's right," Sarah added quickly. "There's room for different perspectives on these issues," but Joy seemed determined to have the last word, unable to resist one final jab at Eddie. "I just think that when you have a platform as big as yours, you have a responsibility to use it thoughtfully." That comment proved to be the final straw for Eddie, who had clearly reached his breaking point with Joy's sanctimonious lecturing. "A responsibility to who, Joy?" "To you. To whatever committee decides what's acceptable this week, or to the millions of fans who have supported my work for 4 decades. To society," Joy replied pompously, apparently oblivious to how condescending she sounded. "Society?" Eddie's voice was now filled with incredulous anger. "You think you speak for society? You think your personal opinion about what's appropriate somehow represents the views of hundreds of millions of people? I think I speak for people who believe in basic human decency," Joy said, doubling down on her self-righteous position. "Basic human decency," Eddie repeated, his voice getting louder with each word. "Is it basic human decency to ambush a guest on your show? Is it basic human decency to attack someone's life's work without any context or nuance? Is it basic human decency to demand apologies for art that was created decades ago under completely different cultural circumstances?" Joy's face was now bright red, and her voice was shaking with anger as she realized that her attempt to put Eddie in his place had completely backfired. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who built their career on offensive material. And I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who clearly invited me on this show under false pretenses." Eddie fired back immediately. "Did you think I was just going to sit quietly while you tried to tear down everything I've worked for? Did you think I was going to smile and nod while you reduced my entire career to your personal grievances?" The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point, with the other hosts looking increasingly panicked about how to salvage what had become a complete disaster. The audience was sitting in stunned silence, witnessing a level of conflict that was unprecedented in the usually controlled environment of daytime television. "This is exactly the kind of aggressive behavior I was talking about," Joy said, desperately trying to regain some moral high ground in the conversation. "Aggressive behavior?" Eddie laughed bitterly. "Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes attacking me, my work, and my character, and you want to call me aggressive for defending myself? This is unbelievable." Whoopi made one final attempt to restore order to the chaos that the interview had become. "Okay, I think we all need to take a breath here and remember that we're having a conversation about important issues." But Eddie was no longer interested in diplomatic solutions to what had clearly become a personal attack disguised as social commentary. The gloves were officially off, and Joy Behar was about to discover that she had picked the wrong person to try to humiliate on live television. Eddie stood up from his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled, but his eyes blazing with an intensity that made everyone in the studio freeze. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable tension to genuine alarm as one of Hollywood's most respected figures reached his absolute limit. "You know what, Joy?" Eddie said, his voice now dangerously quiet in a way that somehow felt more threatening than all the shouting that had come before. "I've been in this business for over 40 years, and I've dealt with critics, haters, and people who wanted to tear me down. But I have never, and I mean never, encountered someone with the sheer audacity to invite me onto their show just to ambush me with this kind of self-righteous garbage." Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally beginning to realize that she might have pushed too far. "Eddie, I think you're overreacting to some simple questions." "Simple questions?" Eddie's voice exploded with fury, causing several people in the studio to visibly jump. "Simple questions? You call attacking my entire life's work. Simple questions? You call demanding that I apologize for making people laugh. Simple questions? Lady, you wouldn't know a simple question if it walked up and introduced itself to you personally." The producers were now frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, clearly desperate to find a way to cut to commercial. But the confrontation was happening too fast and too intensely for anyone to intervene effectively. "I was trying to have a meaningful conversation about accountability," Joy said weakly. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of Eddie's unleashed anger. "Meaningful conversation?" Eddie laughed. But it was a harsh, bitter sound that contained no trace of his usual warmth. Joy, you wouldn't recognize a meaningful conversation if it came with subtitles in a user manual. What you were trying to do was score cheap political points by attacking someone you thought would just sit there and take it. Whoopi was now standing as well, clearly recognizing that the situation had moved far beyond anything that could be managed through normal hosting techniques. Eddie, maybe we should all just calm down for a minute. No, Whoopi, Eddie said, turning to address her directly while still maintaining his furious energy. I'm not calming down. I'm tired of calming down. I'm tired of pretending that this kind of behavior is acceptable. I'm tired of watching people like Joy turn every conversation into an opportunity to lecture and shame and virtue signal instead of actually engaging with ideas. He turned back to Joy, who was now looking genuinely frightened by the intensity of his response. You want to talk about harm, Joy? Let's talk about the harm you've caused with this little stunt of yours. You've taken what should have been a positive conversation about creativity and art and turned it into a toxic attack session. You've demonstrated to millions of viewers that genuine dialogue is impossible when one person comes in with a predetermined agenda to destroy the other person. I never tried to destroy you, Joy protested, though her voice lacked any conviction. Really? Eddie's voice was dripping with sarcasm. So, what would you call what just happened here? What would you call spending 15 minutes attacking my character, my work, and my integrity? What would you call demanding apologies for comedy that brought joy to millions of people? If that's not an attempted destruction, then I'd love to know what your definition of a friendly conversation looks like. Sarah Haynes made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of the interview. I think there might be some miscommunication happening here. No miscommunication, Sarah, Eddie said, his tone softening slightly when addressing her, but remaining razor-sharp when he glanced back at Joy. This was a very deliberate and calculated attack. Joy knew exactly what she was doing when she prepared those questions. She knew exactly what kind of reaction she was hoping to provoke. The only miscalculation was thinking that I would just sit there and let her get away with it. Joy made one final attempt to regain some semblance of control over the situation she had created. I think you're being paranoid, Eddie. Not everything is a conspiracy against you. That comment proved to be the absolute worst thing she could have said at that moment. Eddie's eyes widened with a level of fury that seemed to surprise even himself. Paranoid, he roared, his voice now filling the entire studio. Paranoid Joy. You just spent 20 minutes systematically attacking everything I've built in my career. And you want to call me paranoid for noticing? You think gaslighting me is going to work here? You think I'm going to question my own perception of reality because you say so? The audience was now completely silent, riveted by the raw emotion pouring out of one of their beloved entertainers. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad day. This was a master craftsman defending his life's work against someone who had clearly underestimated both his intelligence and his backbone. This is exactly the problem with people like you, Joy, Eddie continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of decades of experience in an industry that had tried to tear him down countless times. You think you can say whatever you want, attack whoever you want, and then when people respond with appropriate anger, you can just dismiss them as overreacting or paranoid or dramatic. Well, I've got news for you. That game doesn't work on me. Joy was now sitting in stunned silence, clearly having no idea how to respond to the verbal hurricane that had been unleashed in response to her attempts at gaudy journalism. You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy? Eddie said, his voice finally beginning to lower in volume, but losing none of its intensity. You had the opportunity to have a genuine conversation with someone who has spent 4 decades learning about comedy, about entertainment, about connecting with audiences. You could have asked about the creative process, about the evolution of humor, about the responsibility that comes with making people laugh. Instead, you chose to turn this into a political attack session because that's apparently the only way you know how to engage with the world. He paused for a moment, looking directly into the camera before delivering his final devastating blow. And that, more than any joke I've ever told, is truly offensive. The studio remained in absolute silence for several long seconds as the weight of Eddie's words hung in the air. Finally, Whoopi cleared her throat and attempted to restore some semblance of normalcy to the proceedings. Well, this has certainly been an intense conversation, she said, though her voice betrayed how shaken she was by what had just transpired. Eddie looked around the studio one final time, his anger finally beginning to cool, but his disappointment still clearly visible. It didn't have to be, Whoopi. It really didn't have to be. And with that, he walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned audience, a group of shell-shocked hosts, and one thoroughly humiliated Joy Behar, who had just learned the hard way that some people refuse to be victims of ambush journalism. If you enjoyed this incredible breakdown of what happens when someone tries to take down a legend and gets completely destroyed in the process, make sure you subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments below. What do you think Joy Behar was really trying to accomplish with this attack on Eddie Murphy?